13 years after small and hateful minds conspired to break us, America stands tall and America stands proud.
13 years ago today, 4 hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a field in Pennsylvania. Back now with Ben Shapiro out of Los Angeles. Ben, before we get to what the president said about small hateful minds, talking about policy implications and what 9/11 has brought to us so far, let me take you back to 13 years ago. Where were you? I mean, I can still tell you clearly where I was when I heard about the first plane hitting the World Trade Center.
You know, it was one of those situations where anybody who was a sentient person alive at the time remembers where they were. I was actually dropping one of my sisters off at school with my dad, and I remember that we heard in a phone call that the World Trade Centers were coming down, and we thought this had to be a prank phone call from one of my friend's mothers, and it turned out not to be, obviously. We went inside the school, and we were watching on grainy footage from CNN on this old satellite TV, and obviously, you know, there are no words to describe the kind of horror that I think all Americans felt on that day.
Yeah, I still remember looking down at my bowl of Cheerios, hearing the news on the radio and thinking, oh, it's got to be a terrible accident, not thinking that it was what it is. And so today, yeah, we do take time to remember the 3,000 people that lost their lives that day, people from around the world, not just New Yorkers that day. Now, the president did say small group of hateful minds. You know, I wish we could say it was just 19 people. I wish we could just say, as so many people do, well, it's just the Saudis. Why don't we go after the Saudis? This is, as we were just discussing previously about dealing with ISIS and ISIL, this is all about the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, the Salafist ideology that is unfortunately not contained to a small group of people. What can America do? What can the rest of the world do to combat this going forward?
And we can hold accountable not only the folks who were responsible for 9/11 and their allies, but people who are ideological allies. And the reality is that, unfortunately, there are a lot of regimes all over the world that need to be held accountable. I mean, there are regimes in Turkey, there are regimes in Qatar. They're supposed to be our allies who are associated with this sort of ideology. And we don't do anybody any favors by obscuring the fact that there are tens of millions of people who agree with this basic root ideology, and the way to fight it is to use overwhelming force against it. I mean, people wonder, why is it that we haven't had more terrorist attacks in the United States since 9/11? The answer is that it's a pretty good indicator that you shouldn't attack the United States when, after you attack us, we take down Afghanistan and then Iraq. That actually has an impact on a lot of folks. The reality is that the terror attacks that have taken place in the United States since 9/11 have largely been by people who are quasi-affiliated with terrorist groups, but they're not members of the organized terrorist group itself, because attacking the American homeland presumably comes with certain consequences. The problem I see is that in the United States, that's falling away. And as we cut our military power, as we determine that every terrorist attack is just an attack by individuals as opposed to an attack by a group, as we move further away from the power of deterring people through devastating their home bases, we're moving back toward the pre-9/11 mentality that led to 9/11 in the first place.
Unfortunately, I think we're there already in most of the Western world. David Cameron, given what he's dealing with in Britain, is finally starting to talk about it. Prime Minister Harper here in Canada will say Islamism is the greatest global security threat, but he gets blasted by the chattering classes for it. I don't think President Obama would utter those words. And then you've got the fact that we're arming places like Qatar, we're arming places like Saudi Arabia. Last 30 seconds to you, sir.
You know, the only thing that we can do at this point, if we really want to win the war on terror, is label it for what it always was, a war on radical Islam. And we have to recognize who our enemies are, and we have to fight them in every way available. And the way not to fight them is to continue to pretend that they don't exist and that there's some sort of imaginary group of extremists of all stripes who get together like a multiracial gang from a 1980s sitcom. That's not the way that it works. There is a clear enemy out there, and if we're not targeting it, then we're not doing anybody any favors.
All right, Ben, great talking as always, and we'll chat soon next week.